are you? Do you ever ask yourself that? Do you ever actually sit around with no technology, no books, no people, and ask yourself, who are you? It's not a question that high schoolers regularly ask. It's not a question that adults regularly ask. It's one that we just assume. But I'm curious, today, the third week in September, who are you? Now, when I'm asking, who are you? You may initially say, well, I'm me. I'm Steve. I'm Janet. In this case, I'm Musk. But then I'm going to ask, because I'm just that kind of person, what does that mean? Who are you? Take a minute, and I want you to think about who you are. I'm not going to tell you how to define that. I just want you to define it. Who are you? Are you thinking about it? Make sure you're thinking about it. I'm watching you. I bet that one of the first things you thought about is, I'm a kid. I'm 16. I'm the son or daughter of somebody. I'm tall. I'm smart. I'm fast. I'm short. I'm funny. I'm the captain of my sports team. I'm the lead in the musical. I'm third chair violin. You may have even thought of things like, I'm the phone girl at the local Marks. I'm the guy who punches dough, who stands behind the phone girl at Marks. I'm the guy on the other end of your phone. I'm the funny kid on TikTok. All of those things are titles, they're roles, they're different hats you put on, different costumes you wear. Are they you? Is that who you are? Let me ask a follow-up. Who decides who you are? Do you decide? Do the people around you decide? Do the people online decide? Are you who you are because of the number of times somebody liked a post or streaked a snap thing? Is that who you are? Is that how you decide who you are? Now, let's be honest. You're probably asking yourself, this is the beginning of the school year. Why are you making me think? Can't we just take a few notes? Don't worry, they're coming. Social studies isn't about that. One of the things you're going to learn this year is that history is stories. History is people. History is lives lived, sometimes beautifully, sometimes terribly. And that history is the great song, the great story that we all get to play a little part in. We are currently living the history that people next year are going to study, that people in your children's generation are going to study. History is these big questions of who we are, why we are, how we interact with each other. To begin the year, I'm going to ask you those questions. Who are you, and who decides who you are? In class, you were learning about two different empires, two different kingdoms, the Tokugawas in Japan and the Bourbons in France. If we were to go back to 1750 and ask those questions of a French person, who are you? Or ask those questions of a Japanese person, who are you? You know what their answers would be? Whoever the king says I am. The king, the monarch, is an absolute ruler that rules through divine right, rules through the power that God or the gods has given them. They determine who you are. They would determine everything from your occupation, what access to school you have, where you live, whether you can marry. They would determine whether you can have children, the size of your family. And if that's not enough, if you were in France, you could say, well, the king determines all of my earthly life, but the king doesn't decide whether or not I'm a good person. The king doesn't decide whether or not I'm going to heaven or rotting in an eternal state of torment in hell. Well, don't worry, we've got something for that too. It's called the church. Between the church and the monarchy, in 1750 in France, everything that you knew was determined for you. Your station in life and your station in the afterlife was subject to the rules and opinions of outside authorities. And those rules and opinions could change at any time. So our first unit this year, 10.2. 10.2, the astute student out there is asking, what happened to 10.1? Well, 10.1 is technically the world in 1750. That's the Tokugawas, the Bourbons. These questions of identity, these questions of who am I and who determines who I am, are central to our first major topic, the Enlightenment. Enlightenment thinkers in the 1700s, particularly in Western Europe, were perplexed with this question. Why? Why does the king determine who I am? Why does the church determine whether or not I'm a good person or not? Why don't I make those decisions for myself? This question, why, is central to everything that we will study this year. And that's where we begin. The first philosopher I want to introduce you to is a gentleman named René Descartes. In a piece called Discourse on the Method, René Descartes wrote these famous words: cogito, ergo sum. Cogito, ergo sum. Normally, if we were in the room together, I would actually ask you to just break that apart, to solve that riddle for X in the global studies way, if you will. And you'd probably say, well, Musk, that's not English. Very good. This is Latin. So now we would have to translate the Latin. And what you come down to is a very simple phrase, a phrase a kindergarten student could read. I think, or some say, I think, therefore, I am. So congratulations, you've unlocked the history of philosophical thought, and you now have the keys to the future of philosophical thought. You can now impress people at dinner parties by saying some Latin. Cogito, ergo sum. But what on earth does that mean? It seems so simple. I think, therefore I am. Why is this revolutionary? Why is this the kind of thing the kind of thought that will lead people down a road towards revolution? Well, remember, in 1750, you knew who you were because kings told you who you were. And you knew who you were and where you were going because the church told you that you were a good or bad person and told you where you were going afterwards. Rene Descartes says, that's crap. No. He says, I think, or I question, or I have doubts that need answering. Therefore, I know that I am alive. I determine for myself who I am, where I'm going, because I can question, because I can reason, I can think, therefore I am. Okay, so what's so revolutionary about saying, I can ask a question, thus I know I'm alive? Well, when Rene Descartes and some of the philosophers you're going to learn about in a few minutes start asking questions like that, what they're doing is they're asking questions of power. They're asking questions of systems and of people that have power over them. And when you start asking questions like that, if the answers don't add up, things have to change. When you ask questions of power, sometimes it means you have to tear that power down and build something else in its place. So if you look at the second page of your Enlightenment Google Doc, you're going to see a list of vocabulary words. It's really important as we talk about these incredibly hard and complex concepts that we are using words, that when we're using words, we know what the other person is saying. So, for example, the word right, that could mean a lot of different things. I mean, I have a left hand and a right hand. Is that what you mean? Do you mean that something is correct? We need to know what these words mean. In this case, a right is something that you're allowed to do. By virtue of being born, you are allowed to do certain things. You have the right to be alive. You have the right to be free and not owned. You have the right to live where you want. These rights are often written down in governmental documents. Things like the English Bill of Rights, the American Constitution, the French Declaration of Human Rights, or even as recently as the Declaration of Human Rights. These rights are often written down in governmental documents, such as the English Bill of Rights, the American Bill of Rights, the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, or even as recently as the UN Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. A philosopher. You are all philosophers and you don't know it. Anytime that you are asking the deep questions of life, if you are investigating with tenacity, with grit, questions of existence, knowledge, how do I know what I know? Questions of truth. Is it possible for something to be true and not true at the same time? These are philosophical questions. And if you like engaging in these questions, you're a philosopher of sorts. And you may want to go to college and take some philosophy courses. But, pro tip, Uncle Mike's going to give you some wisdom here. If you choose to major in philosophy, congratulations, it's a freaking awesome major. But I highly encourage you to have other sources of income, because one thing that philosophy and the arts have in common is that they don't often pay well. Reason. Reason's another one of those words, like right, that could mean many things. Could be an explanation for something. Like, this is my reason for doing something. Not in this unit. In this unit, reason is the power of the human mind to think logically and in an ordered fashion. This is the kind of thinking you do in math and science all the time. Math and science are products of the scientific revolution, just like the Enlightenment is. What we're doing is we're taking that kind of thought and we're bringing it into the humanities. We're bringing it into social studies and into history. And that is how we ask questions of power, is in logical, ordered thought. Liberty! Oh boy, give me liberty or give me death. Liberty is our freedom to do whatever the heck we want to do. I am free, I'm an American. True, to an extent. But one of the questions that we'll have to look at is, how free are we? And how free do we actually want to be? When we live with other people, sometimes we have to take our freedom and give it up. Here's a perfect example. This face mask. The only reason why this face mask is a chin strap currently is because I'm alone in this room. But if someone else walked into this room, I could say to them, I have the freedom to do whatever I want. You can't stop me. I'm just going to wear my mask down around my chin. I could do that. I do have that freedom. But I'm also responsible for whatever comes out of my mouth and lands on that other person. So my freedom is going to collide with someone else's freedom. And that is where governments get involved. The next word is government. It's like I knew it was there. A government is a group of people who make laws for the people. In our country, our government is a representative democracy. So we, as citizens, we vote for representatives who then make laws on our behalf. It's not the only system of government in the world. In fact, there are other systems that work really well in other countries. This is just the system that works best for us right now. And our representative democracy has changed a lot over time. This is a very fun word to play with. Contract. A contract is an agreement between people. Right now, you and I have a contract. I am your remote teacher. You are my remote student. And we have a contract. Our contract is that I am to take wisdom and knowledge and Jedi mind tricks and all sorts of things, pull it out of my brain, throw it into the ether, and then it comes out of a screen to you. Then your responsibility, your part of this contract, of this agreement, is to take in that information, write it down, type it into a document, remember it, internalize it, and then be able to use it. It's a process of learning. It's an arrangement, it's an agreement. We make these contracts all the time, and we're going to look more in detail at contracts when we look at the individual philosophers. Consent, an incredibly important word. Oh boy, consent is the permission to do something that you or someone else gives. So, example, I consent for you to watch this right now and to take all of the information that I'm giving you. I consent for you to laugh at my face while I'm on the screen because I'm probably making really dumb faces and lots of hand gestures. Please laugh, it's totally fine. I don't give permission for you to record this right now and then put it up on Snapchat in little segments and then have the world make fun of me. Not so cool. When we're doing Google Meet in classroom, I don't consent, I don't give permission for you to share your screen with everyone else and kind of clog up the works. I don't consent to that. So consent is the permission given to do something. Very, very important word for us to play with. Last but not least, reform. A great word. Because it's two things. It's a noun and it's also a verb. A reform is a change. It's a new idea, a new way of thinking, an adaptation on an old idea. To reform something means to change it or to set it back to the way it was, to reform it. We learned about reformers in Global 9, like Martin Luther and John Calvin. They were religious reformers. In the first part of Global 10, we're going to learn about some political reformers. And actually, all throughout Global 10, we're going to learn about political reformers. So, make sure you have these words written down. If you need to pause the video, go back and snag them. That's totally fine. Take a moment, make sure that this is filled in. When you're done, hit play again. Alrighty, I see that you're back. Let's take a dive into what the Enlightenment is from a 30,000 foot level. The Enlightenment is a movement, a revolution of the mind that happens between the middle 1600s and the late 1700s, particularly in Western Europe. What defines the Enlightenment is asking the question, why? When Enlightenment thinkers are looking at their world, they are asking things like, why are you in charge? These questions are then funneled through the process of the scientific method. This is so important. When my daughters were growing up, one of the first things I told them to do is to ask why all the time. And now, mind you, that backfired on me a lot when they were a little bit older and they were asked to do things like wash the dishes. My eldest daughter, Kara, would say, why? And I would say, because I asked you to. And she would say, that's not a good reason. And she's right. It's not a satisfying reason. A better reason would be because you're a member of the family and we all pitch together and we all share the work so that we can all share the reward. But at the end of the day, I just wanted the dishes done. I taught my girls that you can always ask why. In fact, you need to ask why all the time of everyone. And the people that you ask why of, that you ask why to, they should be able to give you a good answer. And if they don't, push harder. That doesn't mean be disrespectful. That doesn't mean be violent. But it does mean be persistent. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's how great democracies are formed. The Enlightenment winds up being called the Age of Reason for that purpose, because instead of coming to emotional assumptions or assumptions based on tradition as your explanations for things, we're now beginning to order our thought in a logical way that can be repeated in experimental forms. We're asking questions of government. We're asking questions of the church. We're asking questions about who gets to make decisions and who has power and who doesn't. And these are questions that we should continue to ask today. Just because we're in the 21st century doesn't mean that we need to stop asking the questions because the questions are 400 years old. These are questions to continue to ask today. Who has power? Who doesn't? Why? Who decided this government? Who decided the way that this government should run? Should the government change? Don't know. But it's a good question. And the Enlightenment is all about questions. So one of the big questions that Enlightenment philosophers are looking to ask and answer as far as we can is, are humans good or are they not? Are we naturally prone to do good things and be selfless and that sort of thing? Or are we more prone to steal the cookie from the cookie jar? As we explore that idea, you'll see that each philosopher has their own response. The first of our philosophers is a guy named Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes is unlike the other guys. Firstly, he tends to think that humanity is rather greedy. He thinks that humanity is power hungry, and he thinks that humanity is violent. And that because of that, we need a really strong government, particularly a limited monarchy, in order to keep the people in line. Without that, people will just spill out into war and crime, and it'll just be total chaos. What makes him different from the others is not his view of humanity. There are some other philosophers on our list who don't think humans are all that great. What makes him different is that his response is a strong centralized government, particularly a limited monarchy. Other philosophers will choose different answers. As we explore those philosophers, let's take a stroll around the school, and maybe we'll bump into some folks and say hi and what have you. Yeah, it'll be fun. Come on, let's go. Whee! All right, let's go pop into Waple's room for a second. See if he can enlighten us. Mr. Waples has the natural right to life. He also has the right to liberty, the freedom to do as he chooses. In this case, he has chosen to wear a face mask that demonstrates his liberty.
America!
He also has the right to property, not the least of which is this goofy feathered pen.
It's pink?
John Locke would suggest that Mr. Waples has these rights simply because he's alive, and that the purpose of a government is to maintain those rights. If the government is not maintaining those rights, or the government fails in its duty to maintain those rights, it becomes Mr. Waples' job to overthrow that government. And that's where John Locke gets super fun. Baron von Montesquieu suggested that people tend to grab power because they are themselves kind of selfish and a little insecure. That power grab is a natural response because humans are kind of corrupt. Sounds like Thomas Hobbes, huh? So Montesquieu, instead of saying that we need a strong government to repress the people and keep them from fighting and what he suggested is that we need to take government and split it into 3 equal parts. Each one of those parts will be looking out for its own self-interest, and so isn't going to give up power to the other 2 parts all that easily. That leads you to a system called checks and balances, or separation of power, which is the system that we live in. We have an executive branch, which is the president and law enforcement. We have a legislative branch who makes the laws, and then we have a judicial branch which determines whether or not those laws are fair. Each one of those branches exists with its own power and checks the other ones. It keeps one person from getting total control. So let's talk a little bit about Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau has 2 concepts that you really need to know. The first one is social contract, really important. The other one is called the general will. I can use my mask as a social contract, as evidence of my social contract. Rousseau would say because we live in a society, because we live with other people, we are responsible to make sure that our freedom doesn't collide with their freedom. If I were to be walking around the hallways with this sucker down below my chin, I could be spreading COVID-19 all over the school, and that would be horrible. So because I live with other people and because I respect their freedom, I wear this mask so as to not let my freedom collide with theirs. Here's another example. See the lines on the road here? Looks very much like County Road 41 or Main Street here. It says that I'm to walk on this side of the road and to continue to move in this direction. You'll notice that Mrs. Sarah is walking on the opposite side of the road. Is there anything about the tape that's on the floor that prevents me from just going, wee, or wee? No, there isn't. What's there is a social contract. The contract says that I stay in my lane, Mrs. Sarah stays in her lane, and the two of us don't spread disease to each other. Or if you're on the road, the two of us don't collide into each other. Does it make me less free? Yeah, a little bit. But that allows me to live in a society with other people and not have our freedoms collide. The thing we need to know about Voltaire is that Voltaire was very concerned about your freedom of speech, your ability to say what you need to say to power without being threatened. If I were to say, walk up to a principal and have a legitimate concern, Voltaire would support my freedom to say that to someone in power. But my freedom of speech has boundaries. I can't walk into the main office here. I can't walk into the office suite and shout, "There's a fire in the bathroom." I mean, I could, and when I do that, everybody in the main office is going to look at me like I have three heads. Either that, or they're going to throw things at me and be very angry that I've caused a ruckus. See, our freedom of speech has limits. We're not allowed to walk into a crowded auditorium and shout fire. We're not allowed to walk down the street and discuss, say, having a bomb in our pocket. We're not allowed to do that because we live in a society, because we live in a culture, and because in that case, our freedom would then collide with someone else's. And you're going to notice that is a very common theme amongst Rousseau and Voltaire, that you are free until your freedom collides with someone else's.